Hey guys, in this episode, let's go through how to buy your first home in Australia. So many of you want to buy your first home, but it's a really overwhelming experience from where to buy it to what entity to buy it in, how to get the right loan, how to actually sign the contract, how to negotiate, etc. So I'll be going through the different steps in this episode over the next 10 minutes and trying to point out as we go through the different steps what people miss, what people make mistakes on, what you only learn once you've bought a number of properties. I've been involved in over 3,500 property transactions. And so hopefully some of that knowledge distilled within, of course, 10 minutes, only so much I can say, will help you avoid a lot of mistakes. Because let's face it, this is probably the most expensive mistake or investment decision or PPOR decision, principal place of residence decision, you'll ever make. My name's PK. If you get value from this, hit the subscribe button, give it a like. So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure you buy in the right entity. I know so many of you, let's say you're married, you'll really be tempted to go halves, 50-50 between husband and wife or something like that. Or maybe if you're a little bit more astute, you might say, okay, 100% in the wife's name if the husband's already got a bunch of different assets or vice versa. But one thing I just want you to consider, this is not financial advice. One thing I want you to consider is that on average in Australia, people move out of their houses every 7 years. What that means is in Australia, we have just over 2 million property investors, but around 1 million of those aren't intentional property investors. Rather, they're people who bought their own home and then decided to upgrade later on or decided to downgrade later on. And they decided, hey, why sell this property? I mean, property always goes up in Australia over the long term. Why not keep it? We can afford to keep it, so let's keep it. And so they weren't really intentional property investors. Chances are, after about 7 years, you'll also look to upgrade as your financial performance at the workplace and your business improves. You have more deposit, more serviceability, more cash flow. Or if you're in the later years of your life, you might decide to downgrade, and in which case you might want to keep an asset that funds your retirement, it gives you passive income. The reason I said all that is if that's the case, you guys talk to your accountant, you might want to buy it in a trust. Yes, there's other things in a trust that are downsides of buying a PPOR. You have to be cognizant of things like capital gains tax, etc. But being in a trust, what it means is that if you ever make it into an investment property, and if it's then paying for itself as, let's say, 5, 10, 15 years down the line, the market would have increased, it would be worth a whole lot more, rents would be much higher. It might be self-sufficient, that property, right? Might pay for itself. In which case, if it's in a trust, you might find that the banks ignore it completely if it's self-sufficient in that trust. All the income is offsetting the losses, in other words, the mortgage repayments. The banks may ignore it from a borrowing capacity perspective and allow you to buy a much bigger dream home. So that is one consideration of buying in a trust. There's so many others, like the ability to choose between husband and wife how you split the income, the net income from that investment property. You don't have to lock it in stone like if you do buy it in a personal name. If a husband owns 100%, all that rental income goes to the husband. But if you buy it in a trust, discretionary trust that is, you can decide as and when you want to distribute some to the wife, some to the husband, in different percentages in different years. So it gives you flexibility. Anyway, we don't have so much time. So that is the ownership aspect of it. Talk to your accountant. Number two, talk to a mortgage broker. A lot of you are super tempted, right, to go to the bank, ANZ or whatever, and say, hey, this is my income, this is my pay slips, how much can I borrow? But I guarantee you, well, let's say 99 times out of 100, I'll say that if you go to a mortgage broker, they will have the ability to talk with 30, maybe 35 different lenders, including ones you probably never even heard of. And that way you can maybe get a much, much better interest rate. Whole lot of other benefits of going through a mortgage broker as well. They're free, by the way. The bank pays them, not you. So they're free and they're working on your side. And in that way, you can get a much better interest rate and maybe a much better loan product without having to go to a bank. With mortgage brokers, you do it all from home. Super convenient. So step number 2. Step number 3 is then once you know how much your budget is, because the broker told you, hey, PK, you can afford, I'm just making this up, $500,000. Okay, that's what the bank will lend you. I see you've got $100,000 in deposit, so that's $600,000 of property that you can afford. Then you can simply narrow down your suburbs and the specific property type. So we know if you go on real estate or domain, it's really super simple to filter, right? Filter down what suburbs meet your grade. You may decide to buy a freestanding house, townhouse, or unit. Now in Sydney, maybe Melbourne, if you have a budget of less than 800K, 900K, you might find that you can't afford a freestanding house. Okay, so you in that case need to go and look for townhouses. But in terms of order of preference, for long-term capital growth, remember, think about it as an investment decision and a PPR decision. There's emotions involved, right? There's emotions, school districts and where your friends and family live, where you like the vibe, all of that is important. That's like the emotive circle. And then there's the investment circle. What will actually go up in value so that in the future you can recycle your debt and make wise investment decisions. You can make it into an investment property. And in general, you can grow your net wealth as fast as possible. It might go up in value rapidly. You can take equity and buy investment properties. And so there's these two circles. Try to find the concentric circle. Try to find in the Venn diagram where it intersects. Okay, and that is done by choosing the right dwelling type, always in the favor of houses, freestanding houses first, then townhouses, then units. And then, of course, look at data. Try to avoid buying in a place where in 5-10 years' time, there's going to be thousands of new lots approved by the council, and the developers, builders are going to come in and build thousands of new townhouses or houses or high-rise units or whatever. There's so many different data factors that we look at. In fact, 30 to 35 data factors at the suburb level, and then another 30 to 35 data factors at the property level. But that's one of the most important ones. And you can go to ABS website and see the building approvals, call the council and see what their plan is for that district, for that region, for that neighborhood going forward. That's the suburb selection phase. Now, when you've done the suburb selection phase, it's down to the property selection. When it comes to property selection, you want to make sure, there's so many things to look at. Make sure you're away from floods. You just go on the local council website. You don't want to be in a flooding zone whatsoever. You don't want to be on a main road. Maybe you don't care about the noise, but others may, and therefore the resale value of the property reduces. You don't want to be right opposite a school zone or a school either. It might sound really convenient, and it probably is. Maybe a lot of people don't mind, but then the traffic and noise pollution increases. You don't want to be too close to high transmission power lines. You don't want to have one of those ugly power green boxes in your front yard. You don't want to have some unsightly easement, that allows different people into your backyard of your property very regularly. There's so many things to look at, but once you've identified your property that checks all of these boxes in terms of what to look out for, what not to look out for, then it comes to negotiation. And when it comes to dealing with sales agents, it's not a combative relationship that will help you. You try to negotiate best you can and try to go on real estate in the sold section, see similar properties that have sold, similar, let's say 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-garage, see what they've sold for, and therefore you can value the property. Don't overpay by just going off what a friend paid a year ago or what CoreLogic says or what the bank website says. All of those are wrong. Do that research yourself. Go on the sold section real estate and see what similar properties are going for. Find like 9-10 of them, and therefore your market understanding will rapidly improve. And then when you put an offer on, you have to do it in a contract. In that contract, make sure you put it subject to building and pest. Speak with your conveyancer at this point. You can find a conveyancer, and the conveyancer will help you review the contract before you sign it. But make sure you get words to the effect of to the buyer's absolute satisfaction in terms of building and pest. You don't want there to be massive issues, okay, with roofs, draining, plumbing, electricity. In fact, these are the 4 things that people have buyer's remorse over. They buy a property, they don't do their due diligence, they don't get the right contractors or tradies in to inspect the property. So make sure your contract is subject to these things and, of course, subject to finance. And your broker will help you decide whether that should be 7 days, 14 days, 21 days, or something else. Of course, that's formal finance approval from the bank. The contract should be subject to it. If it's not, and the bank decides they don't want to lend you money, well, then you can't really get out of the contract. So those are the two most important things. And then when you have gone into a conditional contract, i.e., you've signed the contract, the seller has signed the contract, at that point, it's important, A, to work really diligently with your mortgage broker to make sure you're giving all your pay slips, the paperwork, so that they can get finance formally approved, but also get a roofer to look at the property, especially if the property is established, 20, 30, 40, 50 years old. I know you can just use a building and pest inspector, and I do recommend that, but for the older properties, spend $200, $300, get a roofer on that roof and look at their property, because roofs are often the most expensive things to rectify or replace. It can cost $100,000 plus to redo a roof, and plus many months of downtime. If it's a very old property, get an electrician in to see if the electrical work is still good, and then drainage. Get a plumber in if it's a very old property to see if the faucets are working fine, if the drainage, stormwater, sewerage, everything to the mains, if there needs to be a pump in the back if it's on a slope, which I would avoid buying a property on a slope. If there's something like that, make sure that all of the electrics and all of the pump and all of the drains and pipes are doing what they need to do, because the last thing you want to do is get into that property, take the keys, and then that stuff doesn't work, and no one's really gonna test everything unless you ask them. Those are what the inspections are for. When we moved into this home, right now I'm in, it's kind of crazy out there. My son's out there and a lot of noise around other parts of the house, so I'm kind of camping out in the theater room right now. When we moved in, first night was winter, and the gas furnace wouldn't work for the heating. And, silly me, I didn't get a contractor in to do my due diligence to see if the gas furnace was actually working. When we inspected the property, it was. By the time we moved in, a few months later, it wasn't. Okay, so I didn't really go into the depth and understand and get them to look at every single thing regarding or related to the heating. That was my bad. I don't want you guys to make the same mistake. So once all those checks have been passed and your finances approved, then you tell your conveyancer, hey, all good. You can tell the seller's conveyancer that I'm happy to go unconditional. And as soon as you go unconditional, you can't really go back. Okay, that doesn't mean you've settled the property. Settlement might still be a week away, 2 weeks away, 3 weeks away, 4 weeks away, whatever the contract says. And by the way, you can negotiate all this before you sign the contract. But at the unconditional phase, you can't really backtrack. And it's that time you can use to get all your ducks in a row. If there was small things that the contractors or tradespeople said to fix, you can maybe start lining up the quotes now, or start scheduling in the project so that as soon as you take the key, you can start doing it. In fact, you can even word into the contract before you sign words to the effect that you can access the property before settlement. So even if you haven't paid for it, you can start getting people in to fix things. That's more advanced. I go through more advanced things like this in my mentorship program. Lots of clauses that you put in the special conditions box, etc. And so once you then settle, you get the keys, then you move in, and you're pretty happy. You're pretty happy. But at this point, you really want to make sure that the whole house is functioning really well. You want to make sure that your name was properly transferred in the land titles office so that there wasn't any discrepancies. Sometimes they make typos, they don't actually transfer your name. Last thing you want is in 5 years to realize that the official owner is still the seller. You don't want to be involved in any of that nonsense. Okay. And then same with the accountant. You want to make sure your entities are all good. And basically, that's how you buy your first property. It's not rocket science, but there's so many things that people trip up on, especially when they buy brand new property, which I really don't recommend, because the quality of build these days is pretty terrible. Okay, so you want to make sure you maintain that property, but that's how you buy your first property. And I want to just leave you with one thing. Make sure you get it revalued after 6 months. Make sure you get it revalued after a year. You can do so by going back to your mortgage broker. Chances are, if you followed the data, it would have gone up maybe 50, 100, 150, $200,000, and you'll have equity to then start your investment journey if you haven't already started. Hopefully that helps. If it did, hit the subscribe button and give it a like. My name's PK. So much more to share with you in my mentorship program, but that's all for now.